Hi, thanks for everyone for coming. High-tech delight. Delight's going to be a bit of a theme in this talk, so I think we're going to have a lot of fun this morning. So the alternative title that I gave this in the abstract was Programming the Hard Out of Hardware. Who's ever tried to do some kind of hardware or electronics project? And yeah, and then keep your hand up if like you've run into something almost immediately and you're like, I have no idea what's going on. Yeah, cool. So we're going to talk about that experience. And I want to talk about that experience specifically as developers, because we talk a lot about getting users to use our stuff more easily, but we don't always think about our peers using our stuff as well. So the agenda today is there's a heavy emphasis on open source hardware because it's something that I'm very passionate about and it's something that I regularly contribute to. We're also going to talk about making you know, other developers happy, the people that you work with. Like when everyone's happy, we're all happy. So how can we do better at that? And then how does that influence us to end up writing much better software as well, which again, makes everybody really happy. So a little bit about me, even though Mark did an amazing intro. You can follow me on Twitter and GitHub as noopkat. It does mean no up cat, so it's like a silly self-deprecating nickname, lazy cat. And I'm a front-end dev at Kickstarter, so that's what I do from day to day. I don't really do any hardware stuff for my day job, but I do a lot of really cool stuff to do with the Kickstarter website, and it's an amazing place to work, so feel free to ask me about it after my talk. In my spare time, I'm a member of the Node.js hardware working group. So Node.js as a whole is split into, well, it's a really, really big community. So we split everyone down into working groups, and you can essentially join them at your free will. And I'm part of the hardware working group because we consider ourselves niche, but we also consider ourselves a really important movement in open source hardware. And forming the group actually got the core Node.js group to take us a little bit more seriously. Whenever there's major versions of Node.js released, it can be a bit scary for us, because if there's some native bindings broken to do with, you know, our hardware libraries, it's not a great experience. So we now have a really strong relationship with the Node.js core group and everyone who works on the Node.js Foundation now. So every major bump to a new version of Node.js is nowhere near as scary anymore. And recently I became a member of the testable team, which they're currently at testable version 2. Has anyone heard of the testable? Cool. I'm going to talk very briefly about that. Yeah, the testable is awesome. Testable is essentially a microcontroller that is able to run JavaScript on it natively. So I'll go into detail a little bit more about that later on. So a little bit of background into how I got into this stuff and how I ended up contributing so much open source for hardware. I'm really into just making people smile and delighting people. I've never been someone that wants to create the next big startup. Like for me, it's actually just about like watching someone react to something that you've done and knowing that you've made an impact on their day. That's not right. What's going on there? Let's get, there we go. So yeah, I like creating things that people have a reaction to, and I like inspiring people to kind of do the same. So I sort of err more on the human side of coding. I think that coding is just this unbelievable privilege we have. We can just roll out of bed in the morning and write code and no one can actually stop us. And I just think that that's so amazing, because some of the weird stuff that we do with code, it's just like, are you sure this is okay? So I think that we've got this little slice of paradise, and I love celebrating that through the things that I create. So I'll share a few projects with you so you can kind of see how I made the transition over to helping others do the same. These are called Meow Shoes for obvious reasons. They're actually a very simple hardware setup. There are 4 pressure sensors. There's one in the heel and the toe of each shoe. And when you put them on, it measures, you know, the pressure that you're putting on each sensor. And this hooks up to a companion app that I made in a browser where via WebSockets, it listens to these pressure hits and it plays a 16-beat loop in the browser. And whenever you sort of like are not standing and you just place your foot you know, in a certain pattern, you can queue up a musical note. So you can essentially like use your feet to queue up music in the browser, which is really fun. probably the most fun part of this was figuring out the algorithm for when people are just standing still, because otherwise you get all these insane sounds happening like all at once. So that was a really fun project for me to kind of figure out this sort of stuff. This here is called the PUR. It's the personal ultimate reassurance response, this cat theme here. And this has a heart rate sensor in it, and it's just a very chunky 3D printed enclosure that I did. And if it senses that you have an elevated heart rate, you know, for like, I think a few minutes, I can't remember the exact amount I put, it assumes that you're probably not exercising. You might actually be having an anxiety attack, or you might be feeling really stressed out. So if you have that elevated heart rate for a sustained period of time, it will start sending you text messages of kittens to try and cheer you up. So these are some of the text messages that it sent. So it was a Wi-Fi enabled microcontroller that can like hit up the AT&T API, and AT&T is a big telephone company in America, so it can hit that MMS API and then start dispatching kittens to you. So that was super fun. And again, this is all commentary on like how can we use coding to just delight people, you know, rather than like make lots of money. This was a hackathon project, so it's super rough, but what you're looking at is, this is a thermal printer, so you know when you just buy a coffee in a coffee shop and you get a receipt, it's essentially like the same contraption. And I plugged it into a Raspberry Pi and a battery, and essentially what this does is you hook up your fitness monitor, and it looks at, you know, your activity for the day. And it tries to celebrate the small wins for those that can't be super active. So I found that when you have an activity monitor, the whole idea is you find your friends on the platform and you compete with each other. And it's all about, well, this person did a marathon, so they've got 50,000 steps just for today, and I can't compete with that. And it becomes this awkward sort of competition. And there's not really a space where people who are wearing it just to see whether they're just getting a few extra steps a day. Like there's no real celebration for them. It's always about this personal best thing. So I created this Raspberry Pi project so that it would collect all of your activity at the end of every day, and then it would come up with a story for what it thinks you might have gotten up to that day. So this one here is resembling low activity. So it says quiet time, and then it says around 5 o'clock, I see there wasn't a lot of activity from you. You did 22 steps. It's important to rest, so well done. I trust you were sitting on a lovely tree stump and a friendly dog trotted over to hang out with you. Other stories are things like, wow, you got, you know, 300 steps around 4 o'clock. I assume that you were doing your grocery shopping and a tiger started chasing you around the aisles. So, you know, it's just trying to like celebrate the fact that at least you're moving, and, you know, it's more accessible to people who are not into the competition and aren't runners, because I can't run to save myself unless I'm going to miss my tram. So this is a custom PCB that I designed recently, and a custom PCB is a printed circuit board. And this, I'm not sure how many of you have gone to New York. That's where I live. I live in Brooklyn. That's where Kickstarter is. But we have our own version of the Mikey, and it's actually not like a fancy one like here. It's actually still the swipe magnetic strip one. So that's the white bar that you see on the bottom is resembling that magnetic strip. And not everyone likes the subway there because, you know, they have to take it for a commute, and it can definitely be Sardine City in the morning. But I really love the subway. Like, I really geek out about it, and I see it as like my therapy because I get to stand there and just think about stuff rather than working, and I just love it. It's this underground world that's just, you know, a few feet down underneath you, and it's just so extensive in New York that I love it. And so I was trying to get other people to really like the subway, so I created a web audio API art project in the browser where it takes crappy sounds from the subway and it tries to turn them into music. And I can give you the link to that if you'd like to check it out after this. But I created this companion PCB so that you could save those sounds back onto something in the physical world, and then you could take that down into the subway and have your little sounds cheering you up. So that's sort of where that came about. This is Angie the anglerfish. This is another piece of PCB art that I made because I'm trying to show people that you don't just have to have these square-looking, like very generic-looking circuit boards. You can do something fun. So I'm using the solder mask layer to kind of expose some of the copper to create kind of more of a beautiful effect. And if you know about anglerfish, they're really scary. I tried to make this one look cute, but they have this lure on the end of this appendage on their face, and they use it to lure in like the little tiny male anglerfish so that they can have a family. And I wanted to sort of try and emulate that fish approaching her, and then she's turning her lure on. So when you hold a magnet near this circuit, her lure lights up. So I couldn't get a tiny little magnetic PCB male anglerfish because the dimensions of the PCB aren't supported by most of the outsourcing PCB services I use, but maybe I could turn it into a little cardboard male anglerfish and have it swimming towards. But yeah, and then I'm wanting to do a YouTube series on sort of how I designed this and how I put it all together, so I'm sort of working on that on the side. So as you can tell, there's a lot of feelings in the things that I make, and a lot of feelings go into it, and that's sort of the theme. And so I wanted to sort of take that and push it more towards motivating other people to take delight in learning these things. But where does JavaScript fit into this, right? For a lot of those projects, I did actually use JavaScript in conjunction with, hardware libraries and things like that. Who actually writes JavaScript regularly? Yeah, we have a few. Okay. I got the feeling that most of the audience here is like Java and Android and stuff. So yesterday I talked to a lot of folks and I was like, So you're probably asking, why JavaScript? Like, why would you use JavaScript to do hardware? Because normally you would use C or Lua or just, something that's not a web browser language. And so, I sort of want to, tell you why I personally think that it's really, really beneficial. So I see JavaScript as this universal language, and that's because it's kind of escaped and leaked out of the browser in the last few years. And so you can run it as Node.js. There are lots of different JavaScript engines now, and even Microsoft open sourced their Chakra engine. And so you can pretty much run it any way you like, and so that makes it incredibly flexible. And it is performant to the point where you can be managing streams of data coming in from devices. It has a low barrier to entry. A lot of people going through dev boot camps and things like that. There's a lot of dev boot camps in New York, for example. They're coming in and they're learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And it's amazing that they can learn those languages in a specific context, but then they can take those skills and apply them elsewhere. And I think that's really, really, really powerful. And I think that given that so many people are learning JavaScript, we should be letting JavaScript shine and giving people the opportunity to do more with it. It's a very event-driven language. I think it was Chris's talk yesterday. He was talking about how Lua, the Lua library for the ESP8266 tried to sort of emulate that event-driven kind of thing. So that it means that JavaScript got something right when it comes to hardware. If you're listening for sensor data, or if you're trying to trigger things to happen on a device, like having a language that's, like where events are just natively part of it and asynchronous things are natively part of the language, I think that's really powerful. And lastly, it's called the Internet of Things, and JavaScript is, works in the browser, and it was kind of written for internet-y things. So I just think it makes a lot of sense as a pairing in general. So I was doing a lot of these projects by myself, and I was kind of cobbling together all of these JavaScript things like Node serial port and WebSockets and things like that, just like trying to get it all together. And then in 2013, I ran into the Nodebots community for the first time. And it was actually the fledgling start of Nodebots. It was at JSConf in Florida. And I went to a Nodebots workshop because I was like, oh my God, other people are doing JavaScript robot things. This is awesome. I'm going to go and learn about it. And that's where I kind of ran into a bunch of people who were writing amazing abstractions for creating JavaScript hardware, and I realized that I don't have to do this alone anymore, and people have written a lot of things that I haven't bothered to make the experience a lot nicer. And I got so inspired by that I kind of jumped in and wanted to kind of be part of this. So a friend and I recently, when I lived in Las Vegas, which is another story by itself, I was living in Las Vegas at the time, and I came back, just couldn't stop talking about this Nodebots movement, and so we both decided to run like a Nodebots day or a workshop in Las Vegas to teach people, like, you know, the gospel of JavaScript robotics. And there's already a lot of educational things out of the box that you can use. The Node.js scene has this really cool workshopper where there's lots of different flavors of it, where it's a terminal app and it takes you through teaching you things step by step. So we sort of looked at a bunch of these things and we thought, we can do this, like we can run this. So this is a picture, I think, of the first Nodebots Day that was run in 2014 in Las Vegas, and it was run in this like super nap kind of place with this amazing internet. So it was really, really exciting. It was like a giant data center. And we had kids and we had adults, and we just had all sorts of people wanting to learn how to do this. And it was a raging success of a day, and it was so exciting to see the things that people made. And then we ended up battling the bots at the end of the day after they learned how to put them together. So you can kind of see that over the lunch break, people took cutlery from the lunch and drinking cups and put them on the devices, which is really, really cool. Someone made a sponsor bot where they just took all the sponsor stickers and stuck them all over the bot, which I thought was awesome. You can tell which one is mine. It's the cat on the left at the front. So that was really cool, and I was addicted, and I thought, how can I give back to this community more? Because for the first time, you know, I found myself inspired by the fact that yeah, I just didn't have to do this stuff alone. So that's when I moved into making tools instead of projects, and then hopefully those tools will help other people create projects, and then hopefully we'll see a ripple effect there. And obviously I'm only one person within this Nodebots community. There are people that have come before me that have just already done so much of the hard work, such as Rick Waldron and Johnny Five. If any of you are coming to my workshop tomorrow, we're going to play with Johnny Five, and it's going to be awesome. So the first library that I wrote for JavaScript hardware was called OLED.js. So this is an OLED screen. If anyone's got a Fitbit, this is pretty much the exact same technology that you see. OLED screens are relatively new, yeah, decades, but still. And I thought these things were really cool, but I noticed that in the Johnny Five JavaScript hardware library, it has so many different like modules available for all the different pieces of hardware, but they didn't have one for an OLED screen. So I ended up downloading the data sheet for this device, and then I kind of reverse engineered a bunch of code and stuff to figure out how to write this in JavaScript. And as you can see, I've put a cat on there because that's the theme. And I found this so rewarding, and I learned so much from it that I kind of got addicted. So I've now kind of been on this road to how can I figure out how to take down as many barriers as possible for people. So a project that I'll be talking about in most of my case studies today will be around the project AVR Girl. Has anyone heard of AVR Girl? A couple, yeah, because you did your research. You had to find out about it. Yeah, so I sort of want to change that at the end of this talk. So if anyone's heard of AVR Dude, has anyone heard of that? Yeah, so more people. So AVR Dude is a C-based executable that allows you to flash code to any AVR chip made by Atmel, and that includes Arduinos. So if you've ever used the Arduino IDE before and you click the upload button, that's actually using AVR Dude under the surface. So I wanted to bring that into the 21st century and rewrite it in JavaScript so that it would have unit testing and it would have an active community and probably a slightly more inclusive community who weren't burnt out from managing this. AVR Dude is like at least a 16-year-old app now, and the community is a little fragmented. They're a little bit like the old guard, and I just didn't have a great relationship with them, so I sort of took my ball and went home. But I wanted to bring this into the JavaScript community. So I'll talk about a few details on the things that I tried to do to lower the barriers to people using even just this library. So case study 1, out-of-the-box experience. Now, you all know when you create because you create products every day, that the out-of-the-box experience is one of the most important experiences that you can spend time on. It's the first impression that someone has with your tool or your product, right? And so it's really important to get that right. And when you're learning how to interface with an Arduino for the first time, that's, your out-of-the-box experience. It can be really confusing. You're like, I have this thing that's kind of a different computer, but I have to plug it into my computer, and I don't really know how that's happening, and I already feel really intimidated. So like, who felt intimidated when they first kind of pulled an Arduino out of the box, and they're like, now what? Yeah, a few. I felt like that too. And in JavaScript hardware, this is actually what's going on under the surface. There's a lot of different tools. There's Johnny 5 on the left. The crocodile is my interpretation of Fermata.js. I have a talk that I did on this that I can send out afterwards. It's using Node serial port to send, the data over, and then, on the board itself, there's also the Fermata sketch, and it's talking with all of the cat butlers that are fiddling with the pins on the device. And so there's a lot going on, but you don't necessarily have to expose people to that on day one. But we found that a lot of people were being kind of exposed to this stuff just because we didn't have a better way of abstracting it away. So the previous flow to getting started with JavaScript robotics was download the Arduino IDE, and everyone's like, okay, I like using Sublime Text, but it's fine. And they have to install it, and then they open the IDE, and they're just like, what is this Java thing? I'm not sure what it is. We direct them to open the standard Fermata sketch, and for those who aren't privy to Fermata, Fermata is like a protocol that you can flash as code onto an Arduino, and it essentially exposes all of the pins and all of the functionality as an API. So if you send the correct bytes down the chain, then the standard Fermata script knows your intent and can perform actions for you. So you can pretty much communicate with an Arduino tethered via USB or Wi-Fi, which is really awesome. So we use that for people to be able to run JavaScript locally to kind of remote control their Arduinos when they're first getting started. So they open the standard Fermata sketch. That doesn't even sound like English to them. They then have to kind of go through the menus and pick the correct Arduino board on the correct USB port they have plugged in. And then they click this tiny little tick button, which will upload the code. And then they're not done yet. They close the IDE, and then they never open it again. And it's just sitting around as 150 megs on their hard drive because they're too scared to delete it. And then they feel really confused. And then we're like, OK, now we're doing JavaScript. And they're like, oh, I guess I've got to npm install some stuff now. And, it just keeps going. So I particularly felt that this was not a great experience, and I complained about it for a really long time, and no one really seemed that engaged with solving it. And I was just like, it shouldn't be like this. And people were like, yeah, it shouldn't. But that's not super helpful, and I'm pretty sure that I complained about this for at least 6 months before I did something about it. So I just kept saying, we can do better, we can do better. And then someone who I look up to in the industry a lot, she looked me in the eye and she's like, well, you could do that. And I was like, no, I'm not capable. She's like, no, you could. So it was almost like a dare. So I wrote AVR Girl so that you had a way to npm install something to just upload code. And so then you can include it in setup scripts, and the user doesn't even have to know about it. So if you can npm install something that's less than 17 megs worth of dependencies, then that's something that JavaScript people understand pretty well. They're like, yeah, I know how to npm install something. So that's already a better experience. And then if we're doing all of this nice standard Fermata stuff for them without them realizing, then again, that's an easy way to get people into getting started, and then they can go back and learn that stuff later on once they're a little bit more confident. So AVR Girl Arduino works as both a programmatic include or import into your code, or you can use it on the command line. It's really up to you on how you install it. So you run the command. So I have different flavors of AVR Girl. This is the Arduino one. So you run AVR Girl Arduino. You tell it to flash. You tell it which board and which file. And that's pretty much it. And you can use like -v for verbose, like debug output. And this works pretty much in the same way that AVR Dude does, but under the surface we have some nicer built-ins for JavaScript people. So that's a brief overview of how that works. I was then able to take AVR Girl and abstract that another layer, and I created a NPM module called Fermata Party. And I was trying to make it all jolly, and I was like, yeah, we're going to do robots, so we're going to have a Fermata party just for like 5 minutes where we're going to upload Fermata to our device. So you can essentially npm install that. You run Fermata party, and then what Arduino you're using. So in this case, it would be an Arduino Uno. And a friend of mine actually pull requested me recently, Francis, wanted party mode. So if you run it in party mode, you can just plug Arduinos in, press any key, and it'll flash, and then you disconnect and plug the next one in. So when we have workshops that we're running, it's really easy for them to just make sure all the boards have the code installed. So I loved the fact that there was a party mode, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I feel like he really got the idea of this. So that was really nice to see that resonate. So, you know, we got this really nice step out of the way, and now you can run this sort of stuff in, you know, a robot setup script. And so people can git clone a directory, and then they run that, and then again, like, they're just writing JavaScript immediately, which is really important to me. So the lesson in this case study is, like, create a magic first impression. And there are people out there that are willing to write the tools for you to do that, and you are also very capable of writing these tools too, if it's important enough to you. So that makes people a lot happier, and it's really exciting to see, you know, them not feel so intimidated all the time. So case study 2, when things go wrong, because they will. So, you know, this is an example output of trying to run AVR Girl Arduino on the command line, and it can't find the Arduino. So this seems like a pretty helpful error, right? But it's kind of like, well, why couldn't it find it? And so people open issues, and they're like, hey, it's not working with my Arduino. And for those who have maintained open source software before, hey, it's not working with my Arduino is probably the least helpful thing that you can get from a user. So a lot of the time, my issues look something like this, where it's like, okay, I have this script of questions that I'm going to ask you, including, you know, is your Arduino a clone? You know, does it work if you do these weird workarounds? Can you please run this script on your computer? And it's very cumbersome. It's not a great experience for the other person too. There ends up being this kind of tag game of like weird time zones where you're just, you know, they really need your help, but you're at work, and then you respond to them, and then they're at work, and it's just like not great. And at the same time, writing unit tests and mocking out hardware, it can be really useful, but what you really need when you write this stuff is real testers with real hardware. So I opened this issue asking for people to help me test. I'm like, just plug your Arduino in and run it, and if it works, cool. If it doesn't, let me know. And no one was doing that, right? Like, no one was like, yeah, that sounds like fun. No one really likes testing, and no one really likes manually testing, although I'm very excited for your talk, because, to be honest, I love testing, but I just know that most people don't. So I thought, well, what I'm actually asking the users and the consumers of my tool to do is a lot. I'm asking for them a lot, and I'm taking their time for granted, and I'm taking their generosity for granted. So I thought, what can I do? So I was like, let's make helping fun again. So I tried to figure out a useful abstraction where people can have something that's reproducible, that you know, follows a script every time, and it really helps me. And they don't necessarily have to get in contact with me to help out. So I thought that that would be useful. So I wrote this tool that's kind of hidden under the surface of AVR Girl Arduino called Test Pilot. And if you run a special command, which is just AVR Girl Arduino and then test-pilot, it just pops up this surprise browser window, and it asks you to follow a bunch of steps for me. And so you plug in your Arduino, you tell it what board it is, so there's no command line mumbo jumbo, and then you just click start the test. And what it essentially does is it helps you, it just flashes a script to your board and then checks that it all worked okay. And you log in with GitHub so that the next step down the road, I'll explain why, but you can log in with GitHub too so that I know, like, that you were awesome and you tested for me. So this is an example of, you know, one of the tests failing, where we have an error right down the bottom and it says no Arduino Uno found. But I'm showing the user that, okay, this is the information I'm going to send, because privacy is really important. So there's the username, the board that we're using, the operating system that we're using, the version of AVR Girl that we're using, the version of the test pilot software that we're using, and whether there were any errors. And you can't see, it's slightly off the screen, but you can tick an anonymous box so that I don't send your username. But if you do send your username, I invite you to be part of the AVR Girl organization on GitHub, and then you get that little badge that shows that you belong to like a club. So it's sort of like a little soft reward for somebody doing it, because you don't get little green contribution squares for running this software. So I realized that there should be an incentive. So then that just beams up to my CatchDB database, and I get to look at these really interesting errors, and I get to kind of see the collisions of all the different versions of everything, and the versions of Node and all sorts of stuff. So that really helps me, because I'm not always going to be on top of all of the different combinations. I think it's several hundred combinations that I would have to manually test every time I release a new version. So the lesson here is make it easy and fun for others to help. And then they get really excited because they're like, oh, I'm part of the club now, and like she noticed that I actually tried to help. So that facilitates a really good relationship. And I'm seeing that there have been several people who have been inspired to put their own version of their own test pilot into their software. So Node Serial Port is a project that it's basically the backbone of all of Nodebots. We're looking at trying to create this nice script that people can follow as a test pilot for that too, because when major versions of Node get released, that's the one we're all worried about. So cool. So case study 3, the useful feedback loop. So everyone likes a really tight feedback loop when they're developing, right? It's super important because you don't want to waste time waiting for builds and stuff, but you also want to have really useful debugging behavior. So AVR Girl has 9 types of errors. So there are 9 different things that can go wrong. It's everything from it couldn't find the board to it lost connection with the board halfway through, like executing something or writing the script on. There's all these different protocol errors of the communication protocols I'm using under the surface. There's also just, I'm trying to think. Oh, there's also just, oh, you didn't, that's not even a valid board, that you supplied, and things like that. So reporting these errors in a really easy to kind of like understand way can be quite cumbersome, because these are the different error types that you get with JavaScript, right? You have an eval error, an internal, a range error, a reference error, a syntax error, type, and URI. I feel like there's no hardware-specific errors in this. I know that Java has like way better exceptions. I was like geeking out about that last night and researching it, but this is sort of all you have to work with. And if you don't set your error to be one of these types, what you get is kind of not a great experience. You just get a normal error. So it becomes a generic error. So imagine that you're using AVR Girl with your autonomous sailboat, for example, which actually did happen. At one point, someone was using AVR Girl Arduino to update over the air an autonomous sailboat that was sailing across the Atlantic, which was amazing. They contributed back with some PRs. It was great. Imagine that you're like, okay, so an error happened, but I have no idea what the error was, and like, what can you do? Like, can you just regex the string that I'm returning that's in English? Like, that's just not a nice experience, and JavaScript is just really not equipped to handle that kind of thing. So it would be nice if the error name was like board not found error, and it was something that was constant and something that was easily interpreted by a machine and a human, so that you can actually provide the user with like some kind of feedback as to like, oh, try replugging your board in again, because they're not going to know what not found, means. It's still a little bit kind of abstract to them. So you can maybe use the message if you want, but you can also have the opportunity to write your own, and then you know exactly what happened too. So in JavaScript, you can actually just use composability to like build upon the error object that you have available to you. So you can create a new one, and then you can kind of add in extra fields and things on top of it. So that's something that I experimented with recently. Mark mentioned that I do this Twitch stream where I live code and then I put it on YouTube later. So I do have one called Nicer Errors that you can watch if you go to my YouTube channel. It's a very unflattering video still, but I couldn't find a better one. So what's the advantage in creating, you know, these kind of error abstractions? Well, part of it is it's internationalization friendly. So people can create their own error messages in their own language, and they can, yeah, and that just makes a better experience for the users that they're using for. And there's no more dodgy string regexes where if I just change the error message by like one letter, or if I take the exclamation point away, then everyone's code breaks. Like, that's incredibly fragile. So it just wasn't great. And I've actually kind of been stalking the users of this library, and I'm seeing like my error messages turning up in like apps that users would not be able to grok those errors. And I felt terrible because I was like, I haven't given anyone a better way to do this. So it shows thought for the developer because you're enabling them to do their job better. So the lesson here is you should think about your users of your software, but then think about your users, and think about what your users would want to provide to those users. Let's say users one more time. And you know, that actually makes developers love you because they're like, oh my God, you thought about this. This is nice, thank you. I have the option to do this. So case study 4, we'll move away from AVR Girl because I want to talk about another JavaScript hardware community that I've been really inspired by, who actually provide the best out-of-the-box experience, in my opinion, so far on JavaScript hardware. It's been me basically trying to emulate them this whole time. And that's a specific microcontroller that has a whole community built around it, and that's the testable project. So I mentioned the testable project recently, previously in my talk, but the testable project used to be like a company or an organization, and now they've kind of split out, and they're really an open source community now. So they're taken care of by I believe the jQuery Foundation, and they put out this really cool, I think it's a 32-bit ARM computer essentially. Has a 32-bit ARM chip on it. It runs OpenWRT, which is kind of a flavor of Linux that runs on routers, so it's very Internet of Thingsy. And the out-of-the-box experience is great. You can actually write code on your computer, and then you just write, I think, tessel upload or something like that, and it just bundles your JavaScript up. It copies it over Wi-Fi onto the device, and then it's running on the device. So it's not transpiling it or cross-compiling it into different languages. It's just saying, all right, cool, I'm going to put that over there, and you don't have to worry about it. So I was able to get an LED blinking on this board in like less than 5 minutes just from reading the docs, and I literally had no idea what I was doing with this board because, you know, it is so highly abstracted. So that was really inspiring to me, and what's also inspiring to me is how they run things now that they're sort of this distributed, like, around the world bunch of like completely volunteer, unpaid contributors. Like, no one is actually paid to work on this. No one makes a profit from selling the boards, which gives you an interesting problem to deal with. So they have an open governance model, and this is sort of what it looks like. They see the community on the outside, and then they have a ring of contributors. They have the team members, which I'm part of, and then they have the steering committee in the middle. And this allows them to move really fast because, you know, they have these different people that are assigned to doing different things, and it's very transparent as to like who you need to talk to say something's broken, or say that I want to contribute but I'm not sure how, or I want to use the testable in a workshop, how do I do that? And so upon joining this like middle ring, I was assigned an onboarding mentor. So I get to be onboarded by somebody who already knows the system. They're part of the steering committee. They can actually show me all the ropes, get me to understand like the goals of the project and how we deal with other contributors and things like that. And that was incredibly inspiring. I don't think I've ever been like assigned a mentor on an open source project before just because I wanted to become a team member. And I think that's really exciting. They also have really clearly defined community goals. So they got together recently. They had an offsite with each other in New York, and they came from all around the world, including like Hungary and all sorts of different locations, and I think Germany as well. And they came together to have their latest define community goals that they're aiming for. So I wanted to share the two of them with you. The first one is grow the community to increase contributions and encourage both inclusion and accessibility to newcomers. So you can already see that that's very close to my heart, so I felt like this was a really good match for me to spend time on. I just love that they're trying to both increase contributions but also keep everything inclusive and accessible at the same time. And the second one is, I think, is quite daring. It's support and grow the number of production deployments of Tesla in the field. So Tesla has been used in factories to like track stats of things. It's actually been used in not just as a hobby board. And they think that it has a lot of potential to be used as not just a hobby board, but something that's running continually in production reliably, where, you know, maybe it doesn't have to have a small form factor, or maybe they're not distributing lots of them. So, you know, the cost is not really a concern. And I think that's really inspiring too. Most board manufacturers are like, yeah, it's just for hobbyists, but I think that this is like really ambitious and cool. They had an event when they were in New York called Meet the Tesselators, and I love that if you're part of Tesla, you're a Tesselator, so like everyone's just hugging together. And this was at the end of the day, so a bunch of people had taken off, but this is the Meet the Tesselators Day. Myself in the pink shirt, because yeah, I've chopped my hair off, and the man in the red t-shirt, we were the two like only like general public left at the time, but the other people are all part of the Tesla team. And my onboarding mentor is actually the person in the black t-shirt right in the middle with the really cool hipster mustache. That's Nick, and he's onboarding me, which is really cool. And I turned up, and they were just so generous. They're like, I was like, I lent my Tesla to a friend, so I don't have one. And they're like, here's one, and here's a module, and what were you interested in contributing to, and how can we like help you understand the platform? And this meeting is how I became part of the team, because they saw how excited I was, and they also saw that I was excited about solving some of their really technical problems they're having right now. And it may have to do with like flashing modules, so you know that it made sense for me to help out with that. So we're trying to figure out a way that they can deprecate all of their old uploading tools and use AVRGirl for a bunch of those solutions, so that that maintenance doesn't fall to them anymore, because they have a lot under their umbrella, so I can always help out with that. So I found that just super inspiring, just how kind and open they are, and that they held an event just to meet them. I think that that's something that we should be doing more as a community. So the lesson in this one is that community improves your product a lot, even if you're selling a commercial product. Having these kind of events is really important to getting people engaged with your stuff, and you end up having people contributing in ways that you never thought they would before. So I'm really excited to like get back to New York and start my onboarding process with that. But also that community can't be bought. I mean, they just were like, we're in this co-working space, and you should totally come and meet us. And they didn't, you know, try and do this really weird relationship. They were just very open and genuine about it. And again, they're not profiting from this initiative at all, and yet they're working their guts out to make it a nice experience. And I think that that sort of thing just cannot be bought. You know, it can only be earned. So, you know, invest time with your community and spend time with them. And then everyone ends up a little bit more happy, right? So let's bring this all together. Like, what did we learn through looking at all of these lessons? Well, the first thing is, of course, that JavaScript's really good for robots. If I haven't convinced you already, you should come to my workshop or speak to somebody who goes to my workshop tomorrow, because it's super fun. We are so excited about these tools that we're writing, because we just want to see that first grin when your hello world blinky light starts going. You're like, yes. So that's something that I've just been so overjoyed to share with you today. But also, like, treat your peers like regular users. I know it's easy to say, I'll write those API docs tomorrow, or they'll figure it out because they're a developer and they'll just Google around and they'll look at my source code and they'll figure it out. But I think it's really important to treat each other with the same empathy that we treat users who we assume to be non-technical. You should also make those same assumptions about like the people that you work with and the people that use your software. So don't assume knowledge. There's a lot of times when I forget that people don't always know what flashing to a device means, right? And so I try and alter my language, or I expand upon that. And it's important to just not assume that knowledge of developers. I remember when I first became a developer, everyone's like, it's this, it's so easy, or go and look at the tests and then just like take some of the test code and then make that your code. And I was like, I don't get why that model is still accepted. there's no point. If you want people to use your stuff, like be cool about it. So, you know, try and provide first-class support, even if that's just responding to issues and saying, hey, thanks for like reporting this, I'm totally looking into it. Or making sure to, like, if someone's sending you a lot of PRs and they're great, just give them push access. You know, just tell them what the contribution model is of still opening PRs, but just give them push access. And contributions over complaints. I think we all spend a decent amount of time complaining about other people's stuff, and I think that's actually valid. You know, we're not always great at this stuff, and I'm definitely still learning about this stuff too. But if you could solve something in the same breath it takes you to complain about something 3 times to 3 different people, it's probably worth just sitting down and doing that. And you never know, you could end up making a lot of friends doing that too. So I've definitely learned to stop complaining and instead like asking immediately, like, where can I delight? Like, where can I contribute, or how can I help, rather than it's not working, or like it should be like this. So I think that's, yeah, that's really important. So thanks.